The roar of the airplane engines blended with the howling wind outside the window, but it couldn't drown out the announcement echoing through the first-class cabin. "Attention passengers, due to an unexpected Category 10 storm, we are making an emergency landing at the nearest local airport. Please remain calm and follow instructions." Ryan Cooper sat in the frontmost seat of first class, his sharp blue eyes locked on the iPad screen displaying the map of his latest billion-dollar coastal resort project. Without even glancing up, he muttered, "Emergency landing? What a nuisance." Ryan was the CEO of Cooper Holdings, a real estate empire stretching from New York to Los Angeles. To him, time was money, and money was power, the only two things he trusted since losing his wife and son in a ruthless power struggle 5 years ago. Since then, he had become a man of ice, devoid of laughter, devoid of tears. A few rows behind him, in the economy cabin, Sarah Miller clutched her worn backpack tightly, her hands trembling as the plane lurched. At 29, she was a resilient single mother, juggling 3 jobs to raise her 6-year-old son, Noah. Despite her struggles, she always carried a smile, like sunlight breaking through a storm. But tonight, fear gripped her chest. As long as Noah is safe, nothing else matters. The plane landed with a jarring screech. Ryan scowled at the pitiful airport, drenched in relentless rain. Meanwhile, Sarah hurried off the plane, desperate to find shelter for the night. They reached Evergreen Inn at the same time. Sarah sighed. Ryan frowned. "I'm not sharing a room with you." His voice was cold as steel. Sarah crossed her arms, meeting his icy gaze. "Trust me, I'm not thrilled about this either." The storm outside roared like an untamed beast, and neither of them had a choice. The door slammed shut, sealing out the biting wind and relentless downpour. Inside, the tiny room held only a double bed, a worn-out sofa, and a wobbly wooden table. The air felt heavy, not just with humidity, but with the tension between two strangers who wanted nothing to do with each other. Ryan Cooper cast a disapproving glance around the room, tossing his suitcase onto the floor as if he had just stepped into the last place he ever wanted to be. "This place is a dump," he muttered, his distaste evident. Sarah Miller, wringing out her soaked jacket, shot him a glare. "If you hate it so much, feel free to sleep outside in the rain." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Ryan exhaled sharply, unwilling to entertain her. He sank onto the rickety sofa, pulling out his phone, only to see the dreaded no-signal icon. His plan to resume work immediately was now utterly useless. Sarah pulled out her own phone, her fingers trembling as she tried calling home. "Mrs. Mary, is Noah okay?" Her voice was urgent, her heart pounding. Through the crackling static, a reply came. "He's fine, dear, but the storm, getting worse. Don't worry." The call dropped. Sarah clenched her phone tightly, frustration and helplessness swelling inside her. She couldn't go home to her son, and now she couldn't even hear his voice. "Could you keep it down?" Ryan's irritated voice cut through the silence. Sarah spun around, eyes blazing. "I'm worried about my son. Do you have a problem with that?" Ryan raised a brow, about to snap back with something cutting, but then he stopped. There was more than just anger in her eyes. There was fear. And more than that, there was resilience, the kind of strength that refused to break. For the first time that night, he looked away first. And before he even realized it, he spoke words he had sworn never to say aloud. "I had a son once." Sarah froze. That I couldn't protect him. His voice was quieter now, raw in a way she hadn't expected. The words settled between them, heavy and unshakable. For a moment, their disagreements, their differences, all of it seemed irrelevant. Sarah didn't pry, and Ryan didn't offer anything more. They simply sat in silence, one mother desperate to get back to her child, one man haunted by the child he had lost. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the dimly lit room, the tension between them softened into something unspoken, a quiet understanding. When the storm passed, Ryan and Sarah left Evergreen Inn without a word. No farewell, no lingering looks, just two strangers returning to their own separate lives, as if that night had never happened. But as Sarah walked away, she found herself glancing back for a brief moment, only to see Ryan doing the same before quickly looking away. Neither of them acknowledged it, but something had shifted that night. Ryan dove back into the life he knew best. Boardrooms, million-dollar deals, endless meetings. He convinced himself that the night in that cramped little inn was nothing but an inconvenience, an irrelevant detour in his carefully controlled existence. And yet, no matter how much he buried himself in work, he couldn't quite erase the image of a defiant woman clutching her phone in fear, or the sound of her sarcastic laugh. 1 month later, Ryan arrived in a small coastal town to oversee a new affordable housing project funded by Cooper Holdings. To him, it was just another business trip, another investment to be managed. He had no idea that fate was about to pull him back toward the woman he thought he had left behind. Sarah, still juggling multiple jobs to provide for Noah, had recently taken on a temporary administrative position at the very same construction site. She had no clue that the company funding the project belonged to Ryan Cooper. That afternoon, she walked into the office carrying a stack of reports focused solely on completing her task. Without looking up, she placed the files on the conference table and spoke. Here's this week's expense report if you need anything else. Her words died in her throat the moment her gaze locked onto the man sitting at the head of the table. Ryan. For a split second, something flickered in his sharp blue eyes. Surprise? Recognition? But then, like a reflex, his expression hardened. Sarah recovered quickly, masking her own shock with a smirk. What? Are you here to collect money for your shoes? A few confused glances were exchanged around the room. Ryan's jaw tensed, his voice cool and controlled. I'm the lead investor on this project. Sarah crossed her arms unimpressed. Good for you, but don't expect me to bow just because you're the big boss. Before Ryan could respond, the office door burst open. A 6-year-old boy ran in, his small backpack slipping off one shoulder, his face flushed from racing home from school. Mama? Noah beamed, before suddenly noticing the man at the table. His eyes widened. Wow, cool uncle, do you have a superhero car? Sarah froze. Ryan, for the first time in weeks, had no idea what to say. Ryan Cooper never liked children. After losing his own son, he had spent years avoiding them, convinced that even being near them would stir painful memories he had buried long ago. But Noah Miller, the 6-year-old with bright, curious eyes and a limitless supply of superhero questions, was slowly chipping away at the icy wall Ryan had built around himself. Noah was everywhere. Whenever Ryan visited the construction site, the boy would be there, running beside him, asking about everything from buildings to comic book heroes. And strangely, Ryan didn't mind. Sarah saw it. She saw how Ryan's expression softened whenever Noah laughed, how his rigid posture eased when the boy clung to his sleeve, but she refused to let herself believe in it. Ryan Cooper was not a man who stayed. Yet he kept surprising her. One afternoon, Sarah was in the construction office, sorting through paperwork, when a male coworker strolled over, smirking. Sarah, how about a drink tonight, but leave the kid at home? Sarah barely looked up, not interested. He chuckled. Come on, don't be so uptight. A single mom like you should know how to take a good opportunity. Get out. The words were sharp, authoritative, not from Sarah. Ryan stood at the doorway, his gaze like ice. The man stammered before quickly retreating. Sarah crossed her arms. I could have handled that. Ryan shrugged. I just don't like useless people slowing down my project. Same cold attitude, but she didn't believe him. A week later, Sarah received a letter from her landlord thanking her for paying 3 months of rent in advance. Except she hadn't paid anything. Storming into Ryan's office, she slammed the letter onto his desk. Did you do this? Ryan barely looked up. What if I did? Ryan, she clenched her fists. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. He met her gaze evenly. I just don't want my employees distracted by trivial issues. Sarah exhaled sharply, shaking her head. He would never admit that he cared. But everything changed the night Noah fell sick. It started with a fever, then violent shivers. Sarah panicked as she touched her son's burning forehead. She grabbed her phone, calling for a taxi. No drivers would come. Desperate, she dialed Ryan's number with trembling fingers. He answered immediately. Ryan, Noah's sick. I'm coming. 15 minutes later, headlights pierced through the storm as Ryan's Bentley skidded to a stop in front of her apartment. Without an umbrella, without hesitation, Ryan rushed inside, scooped Noah into his arms, and carried him to the car. Sarah sat beside her son in the back seat, whispering to him, "Hold on, sweetheart, we're almost there." Ryan gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, driving like a man possessed. At the hospital, doctors took Noah in immediately. Sarah stayed by her son's bedside, exhaustion and worry clear in her eyes. But Ryan didn't leave. An hour later, Noah woke up, weak but smiling. His tired eyes found Ryan first. "Cool, uncle, tell me a superhero story." Ryan blinked. He had no idea how to respond. I don't know any," Noah pouted. "Try." Ryan sighed and sat down beside the bed. "All right. Once upon a time, there was a hero, with a fire sword, and he fought monsters." Sarah watched, her heart tightening. For the first time since she met him, Ryan Cooper wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was someone who cared. Ryan sat on the hard plastic chair in the hospital room, his sharp blue eyes clouded with something he refused to name. He couldn't remember the last time he had stayed up all night for someone. Yet here he was, still here, watching over Noah and Sarah. As he gazed at the sleeping boy, Ryan felt an unsettling realization creeping into his chest. He had let himself care, and that terrified him. Noah's laughter had chipped away at his walls, sneaking into the hollow space he thought was impenetrable. Sarah's quiet strength had become a presence he unconsciously sought, something he hadn't felt in years. And that was the problem, because the last time he had cared this much, he had lost everything. "What the hell am I doing?" His heart told him he wanted to stay, but his mind screamed that he couldn't. He had once loved, he had once had a family, and then, in a single cruel twist of fate, he lost everything. He couldn't go through that again. The next morning, when Noah woke up, Ryan was gone. Back to his world of skyscrapers, million-dollar deals, and emotionless transactions. Sarah noticed immediately. The next few days passed in silence. No Ryan at the construction site, no more stolen glances, no more moments of warmth between them. One evening, Noah tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, where's cool uncle?" Sarah forced a smile, hiding the ache in her chest. "He's busy, sweetheart." But Noah wasn't convinced. "But he promised to tell me another superhero story." Sarah pulled her son into a tight embrace. She didn't blame Ryan. She knew he was afraid. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Miles away, inside a towering New York office, Ryan stared blankly at his computer screen. He had made his decision. He had walked away. So why did it feel like he had lost everything all over again? Ryan Cooper had made his choice. He had convinced himself that leaving was the right thing to do, that staying away from Sarah and Noah was the only way to protect himself from loss. But in the days that followed, he found himself unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Noah's laughter. He saw the boy clutching the torn umbrella Ryan had fixed. He remembered the look in Sarah's eyes at the hospital, exhausted yet strong, as if she had long accepted that people in her life would eventually leave. That thought tore something open inside him. That evening, he sat alone in his office, the glittering lights of New York sprawling outside his window. His computer screen was filled with billion-dollar contracts, but he couldn't focus. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over a name he had been trying to forget. Sarah. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know if she even wanted to hear his voice. But before he could stop himself, he pressed call. The dial tone rang once, twice. Then her voice came through, quiet and weary. "Ryan?" His chest tightened. Noah had an accident. The world around him fell silent. "What?" His voice came out hoarse. "He fell off his bike. There was blood, Ryan. He's in the hospital. He's been asking for you." Ryan didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his keys and bolted out of his office as if his life depended on it. Rain pelted against his windshield as he sped down the highway, pushing past speed limits he never broke. This time, he wasn't going to leave. When Ryan arrived at the hospital, he saw Sarah sitting outside the emergency room, her face buried in her hands, shoulders trembling. He didn't hesitate. He knelt before her, gripping her shoulders gently. "I'm here." Sarah looked up, her eyes red and swollen. For the first time since he met her, she wasn't trying to be strong. She nodded, voice barely a whisper. "Noah's waiting for you." Ryan squeezed her hand before stepping inside the hospital room, where a small boy lay with a white bandage on his forehead. The moment Noah saw him, his tired face lit up. "Cool, Uncle," he whispered. Ryan took his small hand in his own. "I'm here, kid, and I'm not going anywhere." Noah's small fingers clung to Ryan's hand, his bright eyes filled with quiet joy despite his exhaustion. "Tell me another superhero story, cool uncle," the boy murmured, voice weak but hopeful. Ryan let out a soft chuckle, one that felt unfamiliar yet strangely natural. "All right, this time, the superhero wears a blue cape, and he's even stronger than the biggest monster." Sarah stood by the doorway, watching silently as Ryan sat beside her son, telling a story that was clumsy, awkward, but made Noah laugh. She didn't say anything, she just felt it. Ryan was back, but more importantly, this time, he was choosing to stay. 2 weeks later, Ryan stood outside Sarah's small apartment, holding a brand new umbrella, the exact same model as the one Noah had broken. When Sarah opened the door, he held it out, his expression hesitant. "Noah said I had to get this for him, and I need to talk to you." Sarah crossed her arms, studying him for a long moment before offering a small smile. "Come in." They sat at the tiny kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between them. Ryan took a deep breath. "I ran once. I'm not running again." His voice was quiet, but firm. Sarah didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, long enough that he felt his heart tighten. Then finally she spoke. "Are you sure?" Ryan reached across the table, taking her hand in his, gripping it tightly. "I've never been more sure of anything." A true smile curved Sarah's lips. From inside the apartment, Noah's excited voice rang out. "Mom, cool uncle is staying, right?" Sarah let out a soft laugh, her eyes glistening with something warm and unspoken. She turned back to Ryan, squeezing his hand. "Yeah, sweetheart, he's staying." Noah whooped excitedly and ran straight into Ryan's arms. "Cool uncle, can we build a superhero fort together?" Ryan chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "We'll build the best one ever." Sarah watched them, her heart swelling with something she had been too afraid to hope for. This time, no one was leaving. 1 year later, the sky was a perfect shade of blue, the afternoon sun casting a warm golden glow over the small garden behind their home. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, their soft fragrance filling the air. In the middle of the yard, a simple yet beautiful wedding setup stood under strings of twinkling fairy lights. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. Noah, now 7, stood proudly in a tiny suit, clutching a small velvet box in his hands. Inside, 2 rings gleamed under the light. Sarah stood across from Ryan, love shining in her eyes, though she couldn't hide the happy tears threatening to fall. Ryan slowly dropped to one knee, his once cold blue eyes now filled with nothing but warmth. "Sarah, I used to be afraid of losing the people I love, but you and Noah taught me that love isn't something to run from, it's something to fight for. Let me spend the rest of my life protecting you both." Sarah laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "What are we waiting for then?" Noah bounced on his heels, grinning as he held out the ring box. "Mom, hurry up, I want to eat cake." Laughter erupted around them. Ryan slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, then pulled her into a deep, loving kiss as the small crowd cheered. At that moment, nothing else mattered. They were finally, truly, forever a family.